This is how to achieve proper exposure in photo and video, but mostly video. There are three factors that contribute to getting correct exposure, and some people call it the exposure triangle, probably because they're triangles of three sides and there's three things involved, but you don't have to call it that. They are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, pronounced like an acronym because it is an acronym, it is not ISO, even though some people say that. Shutter speed controls how long light is allowed to be exposed to your sensor or film. The values are usually measured in fractions of a second. These increments will usually increase by one stop of light at a time, or third stops on most contemporary cameras. Common shutter speed for video is 1/60th or 1/50th of a second. This is because it's kind of close to what a human eye sees based on motion blur, and that is the main factor that shutter speed contributes to is motion blur. So a higher shutter speed will result in lower motion because it freezes the action, and a lower shutter speed results in more motion because the sensor's being exposed for a longer time, so things blur out. Next is aperture, and aperture controls how much light is getting through the lens onto the sensor or film. The numbers are also measured in stops, but they're called f-stops. F-stops will also normally increase by one stop at a time, but also go by third stops on modern cameras. The lower the f-stop, the more light you're going to get, and the higher the f-stop, the less light you're going to get. For some reason, it's inverted that way. The values double every other number like this, but each number is only increasing by one stop of light. Aperture directly affects the depth of field, or how much space within the z-axis is in focus. A lower f-stop will be shallower depth of field, and a higher f-stop will be deeper depth of field. Last is ISO, and ISO is just how sensitive your sensor or film is to light itself. A lower number means less sensitivity, and a higher number is more sensitivity. Normally with film, you're kind of stuck to whatever film stock you choose, but with digital cameras, you can change the ISO values to whatever you want while you're shooting. They usually start at about 100, and the number always doubles, so from 100 it will go to 200, then 400, 800, 1600, 3200, and so on. ISO directly affects the amount of noise or grain, digital noise and grain you're going to get. The higher the number, you're usually going to end up with more noise, especially in shadows. Just kind of try to shoot at a lower ISO if you can to avoid the noise, but if you need to crank it up a little bit, then do so to get your shot. These settings will work for videos and photos also. Usually with video, you're going to set your shutter speed to one speed, and then you kind of adjust everything else around it, your aperture, ISO, and even your lighting. You don't always have to shoot wide open at the lowest aperture to get the shallowest depth of field, because it's kind of, I don't know, just because someone else did it or it looks cinematic, whatever you heard from the internet, I don't know. Just stay away from too many gimmicks, and don't spend extra money to get an f1.4 lens over a 1.8, because the third stop of extra light you're going to get is not worth $1,000. Just buy a light at that point. Buy like 12 lights at that point. I don't know.